Thank you for joining the webinar, Getting the Most Out of Your Autotask Integration with N-Central 10. My name is Jeremy Tillner. I'm a Product Manager at SolarWinds Enable. I am joined today by Patrick Albert, the Head of Product Management at SolarWinds Enable. The agenda for today is to discuss the value of PSA integration, N-Central and Autotask integration, and a short demo at the end. So what I'd like to do is introduce Patrick Albert to discuss the value of PSA integration. Patrick?
Thanks, Jeremy. My name is Patrick Albert. I'm going to go ahead and start out with talking about the value of the PSA integration as a whole, and then this webinar is really specifically focused on the Autotask side of things. So when you take a look at the value of the integration, it really comes down to a couple of key themes that I'll be talking through just really quickly here before we get into some of the more technical details. The first thing that I wanted to talk about is the time savings that you accrue by having the two systems completely and fully integrated. So these are savings that really come from an extremely tight integration between these two platforms, which is absolutely what we're going to be talking about today. So the first thing when you start talking about time savings, and this is probably the most obvious one, N-Central has an extremely advanced monitoring system, and being able to create tickets automatically from that, not having them go to a mailbox, not having them kind of go to a generic area in the PSA or ticketing solution, absolutely saves your technicians a lot of time. N-Central's integration on the ticketing front, which we'll talk about in the technical section in just a moment, we'll be going through how deep we can go and how advanced the configuration can really be, which allows you to be able to assign tickets automatically to different queues, setting different priorities and severities and SLAs. And really our goal here was to allow us to conform to your workflows and your configuration within Autotask. So having an extremely tightly integrated RMM and PSA integration allows you to be able to link those two systems closely, which means that a ticket can be created the right way in your PSA solution, as opposed to it going into a generic area and your technicians having to load it up and go either reprofile it or change the severity or put it into a specific queue as a manual task. So having this level of integration allows you to put it in the right spot at the right time, so saving your technicians the time from having to go through that. It also really eliminates the need to manually create assets in the PSA. And this is absolutely a very time-consuming task. N-Central, the first thing that you do when you deploy to a brand new customer, we start understanding everything that's within the customer's environment, from desktops to laptops to switches, printers, routers, appliances, and we gather a lot of information about these assets. So eliminating the need to be able to have to manually input this into the PSA, it absolutely saves you a tremendous amount of time, and then even more time on the exercise of keeping them up to date. So if you go down the route of manually adding assets into the PSA, you have absolutely no clue as to whether the information about that asset is actually accurate or not. So you go through it on a monthly basis and check all the warranties manually. Absolutely not something we want to put you through. So another very good advantage on having them tightly integrated allows things like warranty information and device names and such to be automatically updated as we see them change in the field. So again, trying to save you as much time as possible. And then this is a topic that we'll be exploring quite a bit today. This is something definitely new to our integration, but we're trying to provide technicians time savings by reducing the need to flip back and forth between the PSA and RMM consoles. As you can imagine, as a technician, the fewer tools you need to leverage to solve a problem, the more time you end up saving. So that's something we'll be exploring quite a bit later on today, as Jeremy will go through a demo for you as well. The next category, again, touches base on some of the similar points, but it talks about improving accuracy. So not only are we creating tickets automatically, but we're making sure that they're done the right way the first time. So tickets are created immediately, and basically you can set it so it starts the clock at the right time. You can set it up so the due dates are set properly, ultimately resulting in extremely accurate ticket creation. And as I mentioned already, touching base on making sure that all the assets are extremely accurate as well. And last but not least, another topic that we'll be exploring quite a bit today in terms of the technology front of how we've solved this problem is gaining insight into your managed devices. So N-Central gives you the ability to view the ticket history of a device when you're looking at it from our perspective in N-Central. And again, we'll be talking about this from a technical point of view shortly. But what we've done here is we've given you access to all tickets that were ever created against that asset in Autotask and brought them effectively into N-Central's UI. That means tickets that were created reactively from your customers through the web portal or by N-Central's automatic ticket creation. You can see that and you can gain a lot of information from that understanding. So if you get a ticket that comes in and you're working on a specific issue, without leaving N-Central's interface, you can go back and take a look at maybe the last time that happened and see what happened and see how it was resolved. So really focusing on gaining insights. So this is definitely a topic that we'll be exploring a little bit further. And then one of the things we're probably the most proud of here is we built some phenomenal combined RMM and PSA reports. So an example there is we have a report within our report manager solution called the Executive Summary Report, and that report goes into details about all the assets, things like performance, things like application availability, AV, backup, etc. But we also reach out into Autotask, pull all their ticket information and bring it into the report. I'll be showing you a quick sample of what that looks like a little bit later on, but a phenomenal solution. Allows you really to give your customers the right reports and just a single report as opposed to a couple different reports from a couple solutions. Absolutely looks extremely professional. So as I start diving into some of the more technical aspects here, I wanted to note that our latest release of N-Central, being N-Central 10, has the deepest PSA integration to date. We've heard from several customers coming over to us from competitive solutions that they've absolutely never seen an integration with Autotask this deep before. And this is absolutely something we're extremely proud of. The integration points, I'm going to be talking about them at a fairly high level, but they're really divided into a couple of major categories. So the first is device onboarding. So when N-Central discovers the device on within a customer's network, we automatically export that asset over into Autotask. Then from a support point of view, we have the ability to, as I mentioned, view tickets, and I'll show you a couple of great screenshots, and Jeremy will do a nice live demo of that later on. We have the ability to automatically create tickets and the ability to manually create tickets from our interface as well. And then finally, the ability to bill and report. So we've given the ability to update contracts, basically service items, services and bundles automatically, the ability to update time entries, and again, as I mentioned, going into blended RMM and PSA reporting. Before I get too deep in any of the specific features, it's important to note that since the acquisition of SolarWinds, we've absolutely been spending a lot of time on user experience. So all these things that we just talked about are done with a lot of user experience research done behind it. And so part of that is going through and designing the features and testing them, making sure that usability is there, learnability is there, and those types of things. But we've also done a tremendous amount of both on-site and over-the-phone research just to watch how technicians interact with N-Central and the PSA. So that gave us the opportunity to better understand where we can inject ourselves into the workflow that will ultimately make their job easier and therefore saving them time. So we've done that through a lot of different areas in N-Central 10. Specific to the PSA integration, as you can see on the left-hand side, we're analyzing the workflow of a traditional help desk type ticket. The technician gets a call, has to go through several steps, which includes opening the two different portals and trying to cross-reference between the different portals, and then ultimately resolving the problem, and then reopening or switching the tabs to the PSA, adding the comments to the ticket, etc. So we've done a lot of work to smoothen out that workflow, inject ourselves where it really makes sense to ultimately save them as much time as possible. And Jeremy will be doing a demo of that just shortly. A little bit of deep dive on some of the integration points. As I mentioned, we do asset export and automatic ticket creation. Now, a couple of things behind the scenes here is we include the ability to map customers and device classes from our terminology over into Autotasks. That just allows a good user experience because you don't have to make sure the names match, If the name changes in one, it doesn't necessarily break the integration between the two of them, because we understand behind the scenes what that information is based off IDs. So again, our goal here is really to not change your workflow, but try to conform and kind of go into how you've configured Autotask, rather than you having to reconfigure Autotask just to get the RMM integration to work. And as I mentioned, assets are exported the second that they're discovered. That is a really important fact, just because N-central, when a device comes into N-central, we don't wait an hour or 2 or 3 hours before we start doing anything. If we recognize there's a problem the second we install our agent, whether the device is patches are out of date, or there's a virus found, or maybe you've set up some proactive automation to resolve some problems, we're going to apply that the second you tell us to, which in many cases is going to be the second that we know about a device. So by pushing out the asset directly into Autotask right away allows us to start billing against the device immediately, allows us to start creating tickets against the device immediately. Whereas if we had to wait for Autotask to pull the device from us, that could potentially lead to either lost revenue by us not adding or creating tickets right away, and those types of things. Also, as I mentioned, on the ticketing front, we've done a lot of work to make sure that we map to your processes as much as possible. So we have things like configurable queues and priorities and types and SLAs. And as you can see by the screenshot on the right-hand side here, we've effectively tried to replicate all the different options that you have when creating a ticket on the Autotask side, bringing them into N-central so you can create different templates, so that if a severe issue comes up, we know exactly how to create a severe issue in Autotask so that it gets dealt with and routed appropriately. And last but not least, on the ticketing front, Jeremy will show you what this looks like a little bit later on. We also have the ability to automatically add time entries as we either create or update tickets. This is something we've been able to do for quite a while, but we've done a lot of work in N-central 10, so I wanted to touch base on it a bit more, is the manual ticket creation. So we've brought the ability right into N-central's UI to create, update, and close tickets without leaving our interface. So if you look on the left-hand side here, we've identified a bunch of potential issues on the device. In some cases, we've had it configured to automatically create these tickets. In some cases, we've told it not to create tickets automatically. So if I want to create a ticket in a reactive fashion, I can just go ahead and click on the Create button there, and that'll reach out into Autotask and create a ticket. Now, that's on the monitoring side of things. Now, if you get a call and a printer is not working and you start going into our new direct support functionality, you can, taking the steps that you've taken to resolve an issue, you can also select those options from the audit trail and create a ticket right from our interface that is not based off of a monitoring service. So you can it'll pop up asking you what do you want the information to be in the ticket, so the name, the description, that type of information, and we will just create that ticket against that asset in Autotask, not even needing to have it driven by a monitoring service. And again, we can update tickets through our interface as well. So if you find a ticket that you've been working on, you can select it through this interface. You can add your own notes to it, and you can actually change the status or close the ticket directly from our interface and potentially add some time onto the ticket. And as I mentioned, we've been trying to bring as much information into our UI as possible. So this will make a lot more sense when Jeremy goes through a demo of this. But we've given you the ability to view tickets against the device in our UI. And again, these are not tickets that N-central has created, not necessarily rather. These could be any tickets that have been created from any source on the Autotask side. So that if you get an issue, you can just jump over to our ticketing tab and you can see the complete ticket history of this device, and you can easily search it so that maybe this issue has happened in the past, and maybe you can pull up that ticket and see how the technician resolved it last time. And on the billing front, this is something we were also extremely proud of as to how we've gone and implemented this. As I mentioned earlier, we've now, as of N-central 10, we have the ability to automatically update service and bundle quantities within Autotask. And we've done that by tying them to N-central filters. If you're not familiar with N-central filters, they're concepts in N-central where when we can target different attributes about a device, meaning that we can build a filter that looks for all Dell devices or all Dell devices that have Adobe installed. And then you can tie that into a flat fee service on the Autotask side, and on a regular basis we can go ahead and update that quantity for you. So just a real live use case there, we had a customer who was charging a kind of a professional services support fee for supporting Photoshop. Now what we did is we built a filter on the N-central side looking for the existence of Photoshop on a device, and then we mapped it to the professional services service that they had in Autotask, mapped it to the appropriate contract, and then from there what we did was we scheduled the update once a month, and then N-central at that given time evaluates the filter, finds out maybe there's 2 devices within that customer that actually have Photoshop installed, and then we go ahead and update the bill basically on the Autotask side. So really neat and really powerful functionality there. So and you can do that about any attribute, almost any attribute in N-central, things like whether AV's installed, patches set up, those types of things. And then last but not least, as I've already mentioned, you can update billing from a time entry perspective. So you can so as you're working through a ticket, you can go in and you can add time onto it via our ticket update functionality. And the last thing, as I mentioned before, I want to pass it over to Jeremy, who is going to do a quick demo of our Autotask integration. We spent a lot of time about a year ago integrating a lot of ticket information into our executive summary report. This is just a quick snapshot of one of the dashboard type elements that we have in the report that goes out and finds out how many tickets that were open and closed within a given period, and how many tickets are remained open. Now this is just one part of the report. There's a lot of other supporting information. We gather almost everything about a ticket, so we can report on a lot of different attributes, things like what type of ticket it was, who it came from, what technician worked on it. We have a lot of that information, so we've got a couple of really good reports that blend the RMM space and the PSA space into one combined report, so your customers have a beautiful, really nice look and feel, really professional report that they really can't differentiate, nor do they need to know that you're using 2 different tools for a couple different tasks. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Jeremy here, who's going to go ahead and give you a demo of the integration.
Thank you, Patrick. So the first thing that I'd like to show you is setting up a ticket recipient. So if you go into your PSA integration and you have your ticket recipients here, if we go into it, you'll see that, as Patrick mentioned, there's all the different fields that they have in Autotask for the various tickets, such as queue, priority, source, status, ticket type, etc. Also in here, you have time entry, where you could set up automatic time entry updates. So you choose your contract here, what kind of work type, the role, and then you can add in how many hours worked or offset hours or hours to bill. The next thing I'd like to show you, actually, if we go here, is billing profiles. So once you go into a billing profile, and here's where you could set up to charge your customers basically per service or per service bundle. So let's say, for example, you wanted to do an AV setup. So anything that you have AV Defender set up on, we would set it up and we would have a billing profile of software antivirus, and this would allow you to charge for that service. The same thing with a service bundle. You would go in and, for example, if we find, let's say, here, and we choose that we would charge them at a silver or pro level for desktop support, and you would be able to do that as well, and you schedule when your device counts would get pushed and when the effective date is at this point. So if we were to go into a device now, and right here, if you look here, you'd see recent tickets, and if you were to click here, you would be able to see the ticket information within Autotask. Another place that you would want it, that you'd be able to see ticketing information, is if you click on monitoring and you click on ticketing, you will see all the tickets associated to this device, and there they are. So one thing that I wanted to show you is how to utilize a pretty powerful tool set named Direct Support and the Audit Trail to create and update tickets. So for people who have not seen N-Central 10 yet, we've added a tool set that like I said, I think is quite powerful, called Direct Support. Within there's a different tools that you could use to troubleshoot and ultimately resolve issues for your customers. So for example, if I had a problem with my biometrics, I would be able to stop the biometric service and restart it, and hopefully that'll solve the issue. On top of that, if that did solve the issue, what we would do then is you could go into the audit trail, you could find the steps you took, such as stopping the biometrics, click on it and hit Create Ticket. Put in a title and some notes and description, choose your ticketing recipient and hit OK, and it's going to create the ticket on the Autotask side. Okay, and as you can see, the ticket was created successfully, and once you started it, this service again, you'd be able to see that did resolve the issue. So you want to update the ticket with that step as well. So go in, select your ticket, and hit OK. And now you're going to choose your note type, add a little note, choose your ticket recipient and the amount of time you worked on it, and hit OK, and it will update that ticket. And at this point, I'd like to thank you all for joining the webinar today. What we would like to do is we'll stay on to do a quick question and answer period for anybody who would like to stay on it and participate in that. Thank you.
All right, so we got a couple of questions that we've got here. So it's just going to take a moment just to sift through quite a few duplicate questions. One of the questions was, does this integrate with N-Central's SaaS version? So the SaaS version of N-Central is not yet upgraded to N-Central 10. As we typically do, we will upgrade the SaaS product roughly a month to 6 weeks after product release. So look forward to an announcement as to when the SaaS version will be upgraded. But absolutely, there's no difference in terms of features once you're on that version. There's quite a few questions as to I think Jeremy actually covered in the demo as to seeing how to create tickets from the direct support tool. Couple of good questions around kind of best practices for setting up ticket recipients. I think what the best solution for setting up a ticket recipient, I think it might make sense to maybe spend some time with either an onboarding rep or your sales engineer. We might be putting together a webinar on best practices kind of at a high level as to set up ticketing recipients. Things like some of the common situations that we've seen. Definitely not covered today, but we've definitely found that a lot of the different situations are very specific as to how you've defined your knock desks. So there may not be a very generic approach to it, but we might be looking at least kind of putting a framework together for a webinar. But if you do have any questions or best practice questions around how to set up ticket recipients, that's definitely something that you could either speak to the onboarding side of things or your sales engineer for. Is there full training available on N-Central 10? So that's actually a very good question. So with N-Central 10, we actually went and redid all of our training videos. So if you go into the NRC under the training section, there's a new portal that gives you access to, I believe it's 60 videos on N-Central 10, covering basically all the different parts of the product, including the PSA integration. Is there a way to have different customer contracts based off the time of day? So that's a good question, Chris. So within ticket recipients, you have the ability to specify the contract that we will be creating the ticket against. So if you combine that with the notifications tab, I believe it is, or the time of day tab on a ticket recipient, you can actually choose what days of week and times of day that we will use in that ticket recipient. So if you needed to specify multiple contracts based on the time of day, you can just create multiple ticket recipients, specify the different contracts, and then just also specify when we should be using those ticket recipients. Does the device mapping need to be configured to get more detail from Enable into Autotask? That's a very good question. So in N-Central 9.5, which was released, I want to say about 8 months ago, That's where we actually took it upon ourselves to push the asset information into Autotask, as opposed to Autotask pulling it from us. Now there was some setup required to be able to actually turn that on. So you have to go into Autotask and disable the previous integration where it pulled the data from us, and then you do have to go into the customer and device class mappings into N-central to be able to configure that. And that's definitely required for us to be able to start pushing the asset information over. So if you have any questions on that, I definitely suggest taking a look at that training portal that I was just mentioning. There's a couple of videos that show you kind of end to end as to how to set up the integration. So I definitely suggest taking a look at that, as going to 9.5 doesn't necessarily turn that on automatically for you. You do have to go through that one-time mapping exercise. Some questions about the device notes. So that's another interesting question. So device notes prior to N-central 10 used to store all the ticket activity, so all the either updates or creations or deletes, which from our perspective seem to kind of add too much noise into the device notes, really reducing the usability of that feature. So in N-central 10, we moved all of the PSA comments. Again, all the comments around creation, updates, deletes. We moved that into the device audit trail. So now the device notes section is only notes that you have added yourselves into it, as opposed to all the comments around us creating tickets automatically. So it definitely improves the usability quite a bit there. So a really good question from Donovan. Does our support contract for N-central cover helping us integrate Autotask into N-central, or is this something we would need to contact Autotask about? So the integration that we built is actually all in N-central, and is absolutely covered under your typical support contract. There's no extra fees for the integration. There's no extra fees for helping you set up the integration. So as I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, I'd start out by taking a look at some of the videos that we posted on the NRC under the training tab. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to either your sales engineer, your support rep, and we can absolutely help you set that up. There's definitely no extra fees for either the integration itself or anything of the sort. And as I mentioned, it's all on our side, so there's very few changes that have to be made on the Autotask side. On the asset integration and being pushed to Autotask, if an asset is updated, so the name, for example, will the name be automatically updated into Autotask? So we keep track of all the different changes that happen to an asset in N-central, and when the majority of the attributes on a device, we will actually push out an update into Autotask. There's a couple of fields that we don't specifically do just because we don't export the fields. So things like if an application gets installed, Autotask doesn't know about the application list, so we don't trigger a device update just because there'd be nothing to update. But for the most part, if anything happens to a device in N-central, we'll definitely push that update off into the Autotask side of things, and that is pretty much immediate, definitely within a couple of seconds, basically. All right, perfect. Outside of that, thanks a lot for joining us today, guys. It was definitely our pleasure, and thanks for spending the time with us.